Freddie, if you don't mind, we can kick it off with the first question.
Yeah, let's start it.
Yeah, so recently there has been a lot of talk about COVID-19 subvariants in the news. I've seen it in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN. All these articles and their titles seem kind of alarming. They're kind of like big, flashy titles. Like one of the titles I saw was like, quote, subvariants are like running freely among the US. Can you tell us a little bit more about what these subvariants are and like what they really mean?
Yeah, exactly. So, exactly, especially over the last couple of weeks, Omicron has really exploded, so to say, especially in the news. So, if you remember back in November of 2021, we had the first Omicron surge, and it came all the way through January. Since then, Omicron has kind of mutated into a few different subvariants. In January and February, we had BA.1 and 2.
Hmm.
And more since March through now, and we talked about it in our last sort of IG Live, we have BA 3, 4, and 5. And now, really, we're seeing about 60% of all COVID cases as BA4/BA 5. And the reason why we can't really tell the difference is most of the mutations for BA 4 and 5 are very similar. So you have to do a little bit more drilling down into those infections as far as which ones is different. But more on like what is the exact difference between the BA4 and 5 variants versus like, the original Omicron and BA1 and BA2 really has to do with how infectious it is. So what we're seeing now with BA4 and 5 is it's much more contagious than original the Omicron and even like Delta and Alpha and all of those variants. So luckily, what we've seen is even though the BA4 and 5 variants are contagious, is that what we're seeing in other countries like Africa, which actually had the Omicron variant first, we're seeing data there that hospitalizations aren't really skyrocketing like we saw with Delta. It's just that there's a lot more cases and it's happening really rapidly. So what that leads me on to believe is that maybe this summer, like we mentioned earlier in this year, there's probably going to be some sort of like surge, if you will. Right now, we're not really seeing it because hospitalizations aren't really going up. It's just a lot of cases. What we might see is that as cases continue to rise, hospitalizations will follow, and then deaths will follow a few weeks after that. And then you can kind of consider us being in a surge. Right now, at my hospital at least, which at one point we had like two and a half, three COVID units of like maybe 50 to 70 people. We're kind of doing really well, fingers crossed. Mainly because we have all the treatments and stuff, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Another thing that is making BA4 and 5, along with being really infectious, something to be worried about is that it's reinfection rate. So the old saying, if you will, is that if you had any of the old COVID variants, then you're
Hmm.
basically protected, right? So you got your shots, and then if you got infected with COVID, then technically you're like a super immune to COVID.
Right.
Unfortunately, because of the mutations with BA4 and 5, we're actually seeing that reinfections are happening much more frequently and then also much faster. So, for instance, if you are someone who got infected with COVID before March at any time, you are more likely to get reinfected with BA4 and 5. So,
Oh,
that is something that you didn't really see before with like if someone was infected with alpha or beta or delta. Usually there was some better protection against Omicron. So far, just to recap for the few people that have joined, which welcome everyone.
welcome everyone.
With BA4 and 5, it's definitely way more contagious, i.e., you should probably, avoid crowded areas. And then also, the reinfection rate is better. So if you or anybody that you know got infected with COVID before March, let's just say, because March is when BA5 first came to the United States, you probably are at a high risk of reinfection. So if you haven't finished your COVID vaccine series, it's probably a good time to complete that soon.
Yeah.
And then one other thing that is definitely on the horizon of news for BA4 and 5 is its ability to supposedly create false negatives. So this is something that there's one study showing that because of the mutations of BA4 and 5, some people might actually be asymptomatic or have like mild symptoms and then also have a negative antigen test, which is really what we've been using to help like keep the infections down, right? So this article hasn't been peer reviewed yet, but it's something that might come up on the news. Right now, I would still rely on all of our antigen tests because, like we talked about in other lives, our antigen tests are pretty good. There's quite a few different companies out there. You know, Binax now. You
Hmm.
have I think it's the iHealth one. You
Yeah.
have all kinds of other tests out there that are actually pretty good.